3 days later, after visiting Hyde Park to make certain that FDR was still determined not to come out of political retirement to run for a third term, Winchell announced his candidacy for President of the United States in the next general election. Until then, those considered in the running were Roosevelt's Secretary of State, Cordell Hull, the former Secretary of Agriculture and the vice presidential candidate on the 1940 ticket, Henry Wallace, Roosevelt's Postmaster General and the chairman of the Democratic Party, James Farley, Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas, and two middle-of-the-road Democrats, neither of them New Dealers, former Indiana Governor Paul V. McNutt and Senator Scott W. Lucas of Illinois. There was also an unconfirmed report circulated and organized by Winchell back when he was still making $800,000 a year circulating unconfirmed reports that should the convention wind up deadlocked, as could easily happen with so unexciting a slate of candidates, Eleanor Roosevelt, a former political and diplomatic presence during her husband's 2 terms, and still a popular figure whose blend of outspokenness and aristocratic reserve had gained her an enormous following among the party's liberal constituency, as well as numerous mocking enemies in the right-wing press, would appear on the convention floor the way Lindbergh did at the 1940 Republican convention and sweep the nomination by acclamation. But once Walter Winchell became the first Democratic candidate to enter the race, and to do so almost 30 months in advance of the 44 election, in advance even of the mid-term congressional elections, and to do so immediately after the noisy fracas that resulted from his having been purged from his profession by the strong-arm push tactics of the fascist gang in the White House, as Winchell described his enemies and their methods in announcing his candidacy, the one-time gossip columnist became the man to beat, the only Democrat with a name known to everyone and audacious enough to assault with ferocity an incumbent as beloved as Lindy. Republican leaders didn't deign to take Winchell seriously, assuming either that the irrepressible performer was putting on a self-glorifying sideshow to sucker funds out of a handful of rich diehard Democrats, or that he was a flamboyant stalking horse for FDR, or perhaps for Roosevelt's ambitious wife, at once stirring up and measuring whatever underground anti-Lindbergh sentiment might possibly exist in a nation where polls showed that Lindbergh continued to be supported by a record 80 to 90% of every classification and category of voter except the Jews. Winchell, in short, was the candidate of the Jews, and himself a Jew of the coarsest type, in no way resembling the inner circle of well-bred, dignified Jewish Democrats like Roosevelt's wealthy friend Bernard Barak, or the banker and New York governor Herbert Lehman, or the recently retired Supreme Court Justice William Brandeis. And as if being a Jew of no background who embodied just about every vulgar trait that made Jews less than welcome in the better strata of American social and business society weren't enough to render him an irrelevant impertinence on the political scene anywhere other than the heavily Jewish precincts of New York City, there was his reputation as an adulterous philanderer with a penchant for seducing long-legged showgirls, and his profligate nightlife among the loose-living Hollywood and Broadway celebrities who drank to all hours at New York's Stork Club to make him anathema to the straight-laced multitude. His candidacy was a joke, and the Republicans treated it as nothing more. But on our street that week, in the immediate aftermath of the firing of Winchell and his instantaneous resurrection as a presidential candidate, the significance of the two events was almost all that neighbors could talk about among themselves. After nearly 2 years of never knowing whether to believe the worst, trying to focus on the demands of their day-to-day lives, and then helplessly absorbing every rumor about what the government had in store for them, of never being able to justify either their alarm or their composure with hard fact, after so much perplexity, they were so ripe for delusion that, when the parents gathered on their beach chairs to chat together in the alleyways at night, the guessing game that inevitably started up could go on without let-up for hours. Who would be vice president on the Winchell ticket? Whom would he appoint to his cabinet? Whom would he appoint to the Supreme Court? Who would turn out to be the greatest leader? FDR or Walter Winchell? They plunged headlong into 1,000 fantasies, and the very small children also caught the spirit and went skipping and dancing about, chanting, "Windshield for president! Windshield for president!" Of course, that no Jew could ever be elected to the presidency, least of all a Jew with a mouth as unstoppable as Winchell's. Even a kid as young as I was already accepted. as if the prescription were laid out in so many words in the U.S. Constitution. Yet not even that ironclad certainty could stop the adults from abandoning common sense and for a night or two imagining themselves and their children as native-born citizens of paradise. And we'll pause there.